Hello, horror hounds. Welcome back to Sheebie Jeebies, a horror podcast by fans, for fans, and about fans. And today we are talking about one of the movies that's in my pantheon of perfect films, Jacob's Ladder from 1990, directed by Adrian Lyne and written by Bruce Joel Rubin. And this is like right up there with Jaws as far as perfect movies for me goes. But today I'm being joined, of course, like live from this purple bedroom below, Stone Gasman. Helps if I get my fingers in the frame. And then somewhere else entirely, Griffin, returning to the show. So thank you guys for joining me again.
It's a pleasure.
I don't really have much of a background with Jacob's Ladder. Like, I first saw it 3 years ago. And I saw it on July 8th, which weirdly enough is when Jacob Singer is discharged. It shows up in the film later on as July 8th, 1972. So that was a fun little coincidence. And I want to know, like, what about y'all? Because Stone, I think you brought this up as wanting to do this for an episode at one point.
Yeah, what happened was that I had picked up this Via Vision imprint Blu-ray last year, right before it sold out, and I tweeted it out asking, how many people had seen this movie, or has it been forgotten and everything, because I'm pretty sure my father rented it in 1991, probably May of 91. And I probably saw bits and pieces of it, but of course I was just too young to understand what the hell was going on with it. But when I tweeted about it, it had this huge response. I mean, it had like 300 likes and a bunch of comments. One of the cast members even liked and commented. I'll mention that later. But the response for it was huge. And I realized, okay, I mean, this is obviously a cult film in many ways. Of all the films that were directed by Adrian Lyne, this is probably my favorite easily. I mean, considering the fact this is the guy that made Flashdance and Fatal Attraction, very popular movies. They have their audiences, but Jacob's Ladder is something on a more complex existential level that I really enjoyed. And when I finally watched it last year, I was blown away by it. I fell in love with it immediately, and I immediately saw connections to like The Sixth Sense, which M. Night Shyamalan did, many 9 years later. And of course, later, I realized, oh, this also has a bit of Carnival of Souls in it. So, but it influenced a lot of films, and we'll talk about the inspirations. But go ahead, Griffin.
I had seen this film about 15 years ago. Probably longer. I saw it right around when I got into the Silent Hills game series, which was when the second game released. So that was like 20. Oh my God, way too long ago. But so I looked it up. I was just like, I had to find all the inspiration. So I tracked down this film, because this film was constantly brought up as like the main, like Stephen King for Silent Hill, and this, and films by David Lynch were the ones that were typically listed. And I saw the film after playing the game, so I'm like, yeah, I could definitely see how, like, the game developers, they got the essence of for the games from this film. Like the film the games in the film very much have that existential and just uncertainty, there's a lot of ambiguous tones, which, come to find out doing research, the film was supposed to be a lot more literal with its theming.
Yeah, Bruce Joel Rubin wanted to be like really straightforward with the biblical interpretations of demons and giving them horns and cloven hooves. And Adrian Lyne's like, nah, man, let's dial it back. Come on, let's rein it in. And that was a good choice, because even, there's the nurse at the beginning of the movie, the one that's, telling telling Jacob, yes, Jacob from Jacob's Ladder, telling Jacob about like there's no Dr. Carlson here, right? And she bends over a little bit, her hat falls off, and she has these little protrusions coming out of her head. And you're like, ew, what is that? And they're just there long enough to creep you out. And that happens with a lot of the special effects in this, like the lamb or whatever horse head that's in the fridge at the party. And there's really not much of a score, so you're not getting any sort of like a lot. You're not really getting a lot of music cues to tell you, hey, something scary is about to happen. It just happens, and then we're on to the next part. It's just a very fluid motion. Like, did I really see that? Because there was nothing to tell me that I'm supposed to be scared of this. But Griffin, I wanted to ask, because I don't play the Silent Hill games, and I don't really have knowledge of them, but is Silent Hill similar with some of their scares, or is it are lighting and music used more in those?
Definitely, music is definitely used. It's probably one of the most prominent parts because the musician Akira Yamaoka, he not only did he do the music score, but he also did all the sound effects for the game. Mostly just using kind of stock sounds from, because you'll hear like doors opening, like wooden doors or gates and stuff, and you'll hear that in various TV shows and other movies and video games. But going back to the nurse part, in Silent Hill 1, you go to a hospital and all the nurses there and the doctors, they all have a giant parasites on their backs. They're all hunchbacked and...
Is it the health insurance companies?
Probably. But they have actual parasites on their backs, and they're very much dressed up like that nurse, kind of in the old school kind of... I guess that's like like kind of more 40s, 60s-ish kind of look to them?
At least with the nurse in Jacob's Ladder, I think that look did start to die off. Like, I remember seeing it mostly in around the 60s, but I guess it could have held on for a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that's another great thing about the Silent Hill games and this film is there's never a specific date that we're truly given, like when is this taking place.
Well, actually, I think it's supposed to be in the 70s, because it's like Jacob gets discharged from Vietnam or from the military in 72. So I think this is probably closer to 74 then, maybe. It's probably been about 2 years since he's been back.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I guess that just completely negates my previous idea of, those older nurses' uniforms going out of style in the 60s then.
Mm-hmm.
So, Stone, I know that you're not like a historian about New York City, but thoughts about New York in the 70s? Was this a pretty good representation? You're muted, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when I think of New York in the 1970s, I think of how it was dotted with a lot of pornographic theaters. You think of Taxi Driver, you think of other movies of that era where before the pre-Giuliani days, before things got cleaned up and everything. And even though I lived in New York for many, many years, I don't have any real knowledge about the history of it because I wasn't born there. I was actually born in Virginia. And the thing is that the movie opens up in 1971, which is pretty much only a couple of years before Vietnam ended, and he was discharged in 72, and then the rest of the action takes place in the mid 70s, or rather, I mean, if we're going to go into spoilers, it's all more or less in Jacob's mind, but the period detail strongly suggests like 1975, 1976, based on the music choices and everything, and you were mentioning, Sam, about the lack of music score. I was watching one of the featurettes on the Blu-ray earlier, and they were saying how it's like it's so eerie. Like it feels like this scene should have music, and it might have been there at one point, but it was scaled back. And that's the thing. The guy that did the music for this, Maurice Yari, he had done way back in the 60s, he had done Lawrence of Arabia, Dr. Zhivago, and he also worked with director Adrian Lyne on Fatal Attraction right before Jacob's Ladder. And I like how the music is very, very subtle. You know, there's no jump scares really in this. There's no like, you know, the insistence on using music as a way to make the audience jump, because that's not what this movie's goal is. And you know, I was going to talk about real quick Bruce Joel Rubin. His inspiration for this was actually he had a nightmare which involved him being stuck in a New York subway system, because he had lived in New York in 1980, and he had this nightmare where he couldn't get out of this New York train station. So he had to go deeper and deeper and deeper, a la Dante's Inferno, in the subway system where it's darker, it's icky, it's grimy, it's, you know, and he just can't get out. And he wrote the script, and it, you know, it ended up, I mean, it took 10 years for it to get filmed, obviously. His first script that got produced, which was in 1981, got filmed as Brainstorm, although that was heavily rewritten by other hands. And that movie is famous for two reasons. One, because of the virtual reality sequences, courtesy of director Douglas Trumbull, who did the effects for 2001. And it's also famous for the fact that it was Natalie Wood's final film. In fact, it wasn't released until 2 years after her death in 1983. And but the good, and even though Brainstorm unfortunately flopped, what was in Bruce Joel Rubin's favor is that Jacob's Ladder ended up being cited as one of the 10 best unproduced screenplays, according to one of those film magazines. And he also later wrote the Wes Craven film Deadly Friend, which also bombed because of you know, massive rewrites, and they wanted to put in more gore when the, you know, the horror audience was disappointed and everything. And then finally in 1990 he had a script that became a surefire hit called Ghost, so much so that he actually won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay for Ghost. And I can understand why. I mean, it was a very clever mixture of you know, science fiction and romance and mystery thriller. And you know, say what you will about Ghost, but I mean, it actually has a lot of parallels with Jacob's Ladder, in that it's about, you know, how our lead characters deal with death. You know, the only difference is that Patrick Swayze knew he was dead, and he had to help Demi Moore, who was still living. But in Jacob's Ladder, Tim Robbins doesn't know that he's dead. And the other inspiration for Bruce Joel Rubin was actually the 1885 very famous short story, An Occurrence at Owl Bridge, which, you know, it was set during the Civil War, and it was about a man being hanged, and he thinks he's escaped from the hanging, you know, but we realize at the end that he didn't escape from the hanging, that he ends up dying. And that was filmed twice, in 1929 by Charles Vidor, and also in 1962 as a French short. And that, of course, became most famous because it ended up as an episode of the Twilight Zone series in the very last season. In fact, it was the only Twilight Zone episode where it was made by other hands outside of Rod Serling's crew and everything. So, and the sad thing is that Jacob's Ladder, it barely broke even. You know, it was produced for 25 million and it made 26 million. And Ghost, on the other hand, was the number one movie of 1990. It made $500 million. So, I mean, and I'd like to think that Bruce Joel Rubin won the Oscar for both Ghost and Jacob's Ladder, because Ghost may have won the box office, but Jacob's Ladder was much more higher critically, especially after Fatal Attraction that Adrian Lyne did before that. So, And that's the thing. I think, did the first Silent Hill movie come out in 1994? Am I wrong about
I
that?
think it was 2003.
The first video game, the first Silent Hill game was 99.
99. Oh, same year.
Yeah, and then there was a movie a few years after, but was the movie 2003 or 2004, I think?
2006.
2000.
Really? I thought, okay, well, damn. I got confused. I thought I was thinking about Silent Hill, that second Silent Hill movie. Which
that
nobody really
was 2012, I think.
Ugh.
Well, I just found a Screen Rant article here published Veterans Day of last year. It says a new Silent Hill movie titled Return to Silent Hill is in the works and will be a reboot of the franchise, returning to the fiction movie town of Silent Hill, West Virginia. Although, I think, Griffin, did you know that it's also based on a real town called Centralia in Pennsylvania?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
I've seen pictures of that. It's like, oh man, like it used to be like a mining town, and now it's like a total ghost town. Very, very scary.
Yeah, I think Griffin, you were the one that mentioned that to me before, and I remember looking it up. But yeah, that is chilling.
Yeah.
Also, an Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, that is available for you guys to watch for free at home on Vimeo. So maybe I'll drop the link in the description. I don't know. Depends on what Lauren says. If Lauren says okay, then we will.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can just Google it for yourself. But it is rather faithful to the short story. I think the only thing that gets thrown out of sequence is he's seeing his wife like first, like very early on when he's in the process of dying, and he's imagining that he's escaped, and that does show up later on again, but it's fine. It's not worth picking about. I do like the fact that when he's hearing the voices of the Union soldiers, they sound like gravelly, like they're the demons.
Mm-hmm.
And they also they did a great job with, there's a part in the short story where Peyton Farquhar, our protagonist, is hearing this noise, and it sounds like metal striking metal, but every time it strikes, the pause between those strikes gets longer and longer for him. And then this is before he's hanged, and it turns out it's just the ticking of his pocket watch, which they do a nice job of recreating in the short. But yes, I definitely go watch that too. Go watch it and go read the short story as well. Project Gutenberg, I think, is where I found the short story online for free. So this stuff is just going to kind of like it's just going to add further to appreciating Jacob's Ladder if any of you guys are already existing fans. If you're not, here's more background. So I think we should also probably, just go ahead and spoil the fucking movie.
Yeah.
It's like a 30-some-odd year movie, or a 30-some-odd-year-old movie. So in case you guys haven't seen it, Tim Robbins plays this returning vet from Vietnam named Jacob Singer. And he is remembering this incident that happened to him where he was stabbed with a bayonet. And then when, he's constantly waking up from these nightmares of Vietnam, or these flashbacks too. And, in his regular life. But at the same time, he's also seeing all these weird demonic creatures. And I think it's pretty easy to guess that, this is just an allegory for him being stuck in purgatory and his soul can't move on.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are.
Yeah, I wanted to start with the first, when he first awakens, he's on a New York subway, and he only finds two people. This woman who's just constantly staring at him, never says a word, and he sees a homeless person rolled up on and laying on the chairs, and he's kind of like, okay, whatever, and he's kind of just waiting for his stop, and then he kind of notices what he perceives as a tail is coming out from the legs of the homeless person.
I thought it was super herpes or something.
Yeah. So and then when he gets off, he's at Bergen Street, which is in Silent Hill 3. There's a section of that game where you're in the subway. And
Ooh.
the street where you're supposed to get to is Bergen Street. That's how she gets home. The
Oh,
main character of Silent Hill, the playable character.
I love that
So
Bruce Joel Rubin, like his idea of samsara, you know, being stuck in that endless cycle of suffering. His idea was the subway of New York. So,
I've seen Seinfeld. It looks pretty terrible.
I mean, Stone,
What? I'm
is it
sorry.
like is the subway an endless cycle of suffering?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's very crowded, very noisy, and yeah, I wouldn't want to be stuck in the tunnels down there for obvious reasons. I mean, of course, back in the '70s and '80s, it used to be a lot worse with all the graffiti and everything, and yeah. But and the interesting thing is, all throughout the movie, you see these pictures or posters for drugs. And this, of course, was right after the Bush era, or the Reagan era. Just say no, all that good stuff. And of course, the irony of the whole thing, what I realized on this latest viewing, was that okay, yeah, they back in the '80s, they kept telling us just say no to drugs. Yet at the same time, they were giving our Vietnam veterans like almost every pharmaceutical drug they can possibly give them, you know,
Mhm.
which is just insane. And of course, the drug in question here is known as the ladder, which apparently the military had recruited this hippie chemist to try to isolate the properties of this drug to make the soldiers more aggressive, more mean, aggressive, and everything. And it just goes to show that that the government, they just want to make money off of war. They just want to send all these soldiers and everybody who are expendable and just use them to essentially, win a war that we have no business being involved in. It just goes back to the whole thing about that this country and this government just won't mind its own damn business. And Vietnam, of course, was a catastrophe, as we now know, because the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which got us into the war, never happened. The Secretary of Defense actually admitted that many decades later. It's like, oh yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin incident, it never happened. So we had absolutely no business being in Vietnam. And as a result, over 1 million Vietnamese died, and also about 59,000 of American soldiers. And it was just one of the worst conflicts that we were ever involved in. And the weird thing is, and I saw on this, there's a featurette here, Something's Wrong with My Head, Vietnam War Trauma and Jacob's Ladder by film historian Josh Nelson. And he points out that this movie, Jacob's Ladder, is almost kind of a forgotten footnote in Vietnam cinema. Because, in 1978, we finally had The Deer Hunter, which won Best Picture. And we also had Coming Home, which came out that same year. And then several years later, we had Platoon, Born on the 4th of July, and the Oliver Stone films. And the thing is that Hollywood, especially in the early 80s, and it's part of the reason why Jacob's Ladder didn't get produced for so long, is that they were very, very antsy about depicting movies that were that centered around Vietnam, because it was such a black eye, such a stain on everything. And it was actually, honestly, because of Oliver Stone's Born on the 4th of July that served as an apology. That was Oliver Stone, who was a real life veteran. He wanted to, in his own way, apologize to the country of Vietnam with Born on the 4th of July. If you remember, it had Tom Cruise play this real life veteran, Ron Kovic. He became paralyzed, came home, and eventually he decided to become an anti-war activist. But Jacob's Ladder, it really touched upon, something that really struck a nerve, because, we had Agent Orange, and we had all these weird chemical weapons that really affected our soldiers and killed a lot of them in many ways. And of course, the other Vietnam film, which of course this is kind of related to, is of course First Blood. When John Rambo comes home and he realizes his entire platoon had been affected by Agent Orange, and the last one that he was going to visit, died, and he was the only one left. So, I mean, Vietnam, it was so damaging to this country and to this country's history. But, we try to figure out a way to overcome that. But then by the time, and the funny thing is, Tim Robbins, his theory as to why Jacob's Ladder bombed, or flopped rather, is because of the fact that in 1990, in November of 1990, the Gulf War had started. And so everybody was now distracted by that, which is very possible. So,
yeah. And I constantly think about how many Vietnam vets have, come home with PTSD, with with after being exposed to all of these substances. And then I kind of think, how many generations of trauma did the Vietnam War start? Because I'm sure, trauma just begets trauma, over time. And I'm like, how many new ones did we get out of that? Seems like a lot. But it's, just cool. You just destroyed a generation of men. Great job, guys.
Yeah, exactly. All for money. It was all for profit. It was that's what it was all about. In fact, I mean, just as a side note, this is just my own theory, but I am convinced that JFK was assassinated because of Vietnam. Powerful people wanted that war to happen. And after JFK was killed, Lyndon Johnson, the very first meeting he called when he got into office was over Vietnam. Well, powerful people wanted that war to happen. Sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, I mean, I can't say, because I actually don't have an opinion on any JFK conspiracy theories or ideas like behind the assassination. So, like, my conspiracy theory knowledge is usually like, hey, remember how like we had that old Avril Lavigne and then we had a new Avril Lavigne and the old one's actually dead? That's it.
All right. But before we get too far from it, it is kind of interesting that this film shares more than just the Vietnam. The producers of the film and the production company, Carolco.
Yes.
Mario, is it Kassar?
Mario Kassar and Andrew Vanya.
Vanya. Yes, they were both involved. They actually picked this film up because Adrian Lyne wanted to bring the film to Paramount, who had already produced, Flashdance and Fatal Attraction. They turned him down because they didn't like the ending, and so they Adrian Lyne said, "No way, I'm not making this film unless I'm going to get that ending." And Carolco stepped in, and they were like, "Okay, you want that ending? Here you go." And
what didn't they like about the ending? I mean, how are you supposed to end the movie? Is it?
It ends with the main character realizing that he's dead. And to any audience I can understand from a studio perspective. Well, to an audience, that's a real downer. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This was post Star Wars. Like, movies needed to have a happy ending at this point, or at least because they had to change the ending for Fatal Attraction for a similar reason. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I forgot about that. Can you guys refresh my memory about what they what it was supposed to be? Because I've long forgotten.
I have an idea, but I think Stone would be best to.
Oh man, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I mean, I know they changed it to have a more slasher type ending.
Yeah.
Where she.
From my memory, I apologize to the folks watching, but it was supposed to be. I'm blanking on her name, but Michael Douglas's character was going to be told all the blame was going to be laid at his feet.
Yes.
So they changed it so Glenn Close because Glenn Close was going to totally destroy his life even in the afterlife. And the test audiences absolutely detested it, so they made them change it. And yeah, so
I got it right here. Actually, Alex Forrest was originally scripted slashing her throat, at the film's end with the knife Dan had left on the counter so as to make it appear that Dan had murdered her. After seeing her husband being taken away by police, Beth finds a revealing cassette tape that Alex sent Dan in which he threatens to kill herself. Upon realizing Alex's intentions, Beth takes the tape to the police who clear Dan of the murder. The last scene shows in flashback Alex taking her own life by slashing her throat while listening to Madame Butterfly. After doing test screenings, Joseph Farrell, who handled the screenings, suggested that Paramount shoot a brand new ending.
Yeah. There you go.
And it's fun. Oh, sorry. One more thing. It's funny you brought up Star Wars too, because even though George Lucas was essentially inspired by those old World War II footages of them shooting the airplanes and everything, it was World War II in space, but the subtext was actually Vietnam, with the Rebel Alliance serving as the Vietnamese and the evil Galactic Empire serving as the Pentagon and the U.S. government.
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yep.
So I wanted to discuss the incredible imagery in this film, as far as the horror.
Yeah.
Retreading back to the subway sequence. Tim Robbins, Jacob Singer, is unable to get out of the subway. The stairways are completely chained off, completely gated off. And so he has to start walking down the actual subway train line, and a train eerily comes down with a bright light. We don't hear any sound whatsoever, which I thought was just masterful.
That's a good point.
And then he kind of doesn't really notice it. And then that's when, but we get a subtle kind of foreshadowing with the, I love the, like there's the little lights on the side, and they're kind of like, just kind of slightly moving, and they start moving faster and faster from the rumbling of the subway train car. So once the train comes, Jacob jumps out, leaps out of the way, from getting ran over by it, and he sees these ghoulish, just spirit. I won't say spirits, but these just kind of just haunting figures, all pressing their hands and their faces against the glass, against the windows. And then at the very tail end, we see what looks to be like a conductor, and he just kind of waves them, and it's just, but all their faces are like covered, but it's like it doesn't look like latex or anything. Okay, not latex, but like they would put the pantyhose they put on their face to hide their face.
Oh, like a stocking over their face, like
yeah, stocking,
like a robber basically, but just to obscure their features. Yeah,
and you can't
there was
make out their features whatsoever, and it's incredibly haunting.
Yeah, and they also have that same thing with the guys in the car too, when they try to run Jacob over at the beginning, like the next day, right?
Yes,
it's a similar
that scene. Like so Jacob's just kind of walking. He's a mailman in this in his post as of Vietnam. So he's walking down the street, and this car kind of randomly starts charging after him, and he's trying to dodge out of the way. He keeps trying to come towards him, and he jumps into an alleyway. And he briefly sees another demonic face just kind of biting at the air, almost trying to eat his soul. But then the creepy part is when we see the back. There's this like, it looks like a man, like it looks like it's like a man's face, but it's like been squished, and it's constantly erratically shaking. And I've tried to slow that scene down. I wonder if that new transfer, you can see it better, but that thing has always creeped me out. It's incredible.
And I love that I think this is kind of the birth of shaky head cam. I'm not sure, but I remember seeing, like, the first time I ever saw shaky head was the House on Haunted Hill remake. And I thought that was terrifying just on its own. And I was like, oh wait, no, it's also in Jacob's Ladder. So I don't know how much farther shaky head goes back. But it's a really simple effect because, Adrian Lyne just had this guy shaking his head like really fast and then sped up to like 24 FPS. That's about it. but so effective with how minimal and practical the effects are.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know, because okay, so we had been talking about some of the deleted scenes before, but there's this one deleted scene where Jacob takes the antidote to the ladder that he gets from that chemist Michael,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
yeah, and so he goes to lay down on the bed in Michael's apartment, and blood starts dripping in from like around the light fixture and in the crack of this and through the crack
Yeah,
of
the
ceiling.
ceiling just starts cracking.
Yeah.
Cracks just start forming all on the ceiling.
Yeah, and like shit starts shaking really violently, and it seems like there's this really powerful wind that's coming out or coming down from the ceiling through that. And because you can see Jacob's like face getting blown all over the place, and then the ceiling just cracks, and there's a fucking monster in there.
Yeah,
And I would love to see that restored.
Yeah, there's a winged creature that we get to see, which we do see in a party sequence about halfway through in the film. Jacob and his new wife. I don't want I don't want to discredit, but Elizabeth Pena, rest in peace, is in this film playing his girlfriend
gorgeous.
or slash wife, and
This
she's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, we see we see parts of the demon, like grinding against Elizabeth Pena at this party, with the strobe lights and everything, and it's just it's insane. And then of course we got the hospital sequence where he's on the gurney, and it feels like we are being literally taken down level after level after level, like in Dante's Inferno. And I was going to say real quick is that Bruce Joel Robin also perceived the film as a modern interpretation of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, liberation through hearing during the intermediate state. Quote, "The inspiration, in a sense, is my entire spiritual upbringing. Once you have a meditative life, you start to see what the world is really far different than what it appears to be. What appears to be finite is really couched in the infinite, and the infinite imbues everything in our lives." And that hospital sequence, that's what really, I mean, when he gets the needle in his forehead delivered by the guy with like a skin over his eyes and everything. Adrian Lyne said he had seen an old BBC documentary years ago where he saw an image of that of a guy with like skin over his eyes like that, and he just had to use it. And it was, that's one of the most haunting images I've ever seen in my life. And it should be noted that the imagery in this film is so influential to the point that director Christopher Nolan said that Jacob's Ladder, specifically its use of the abstract imagery, was an influence on Oppenheimer.
I could see for Inception, especially.
Yes, Inception as well.
I was going to say I can see that more in Inception. But did he elaborate on the Oppenheimer part?
I just saw it here. Let me see if I can find the article for it. This was during a Q&A. Oh, is it during a YouTube Q&A that said that? Yeah, but I haven't watched the Q&A yet.
Yes, I saw many. Christopher Nolan in 2002 did a remake of I believe a Danish or Swedish film, Insomnia, and there's a lot of it's more that disjointed memory because there's a lot of in Insomnia we see a lot of Al Pacino. He's sitting and kind of looking at it in a dresser, and we keep kind of cutting back and forth from the present to back to this moment to where Al Pacino, he's I don't want to spoil that film. That's not a discussion in this film, but they're that kind of disjointed, what's going on here. And then with Inception, we don't want to forget during that hospital scene, this is where when the big Silent Hill, when he's being wheeled down, he briefly sees a broken bicycle, and it's his we find out it's his deceased son. His son was ran over when he was riding his bicycle. And so we see the bike there. And throughout the film, we see he sees in mirrors the back of his son. His son is kind of playing, and then he runs off. Very much the same thing that happens in Inception. Leonardo DiCaprio's Cobb constantly sees the back. He sees the from the rear of his children, and then they get up and they run away. So I thought that was, I was like, similar, imagery. I love that.
Well, Christopher Nolan obviously loves this movie, and I haven't seen the one with Al Pacino, Insomnia. I haven't seen that since it came out, so I gotta check that out again. So, but we should talk about who plays Tim Robbins' son Gabriel in this film. He's actually uncredited, but it's Macaulay Culkin of all people. Who, look, I will believe anybody that tells me that. Look, he was one of the best, probably the best child actor at that period.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. This movie came out literally 2 weeks before Home Alone, which was the second box office hit of the year, right after Ghost. So
you know what I have to think? It's sort of, so it's like Macaulay Culkin's dad didn't want him to be credited because his dad didn't think it would fit in with like the rest of his like what his vibe was, basically. So think of all the fucking money that Jacob's Ladder missed out on because Macaulay Culkin's dad wouldn't let them credit him. There's so much, it would have been in theaters at the same time.
I don't think that would have helped.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. Jacob's Ladder was, for a different audience. I mean, and of course the R rating kind of restricted, those who were going to see the movie and everything. But
now I'm just saying.
Yeah.
No, you could do this as a double feature because, I mean, think of it. What we could just interpret Home Alone as sort of like, in Marv and Harry as being a couple of those wrathful deities, a la the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
and the furnace down in the basement is
exactly.
And he goes into the church to talk to the South Bend Shovel Slayer.
Yeah, exactly. Deities, and instead of trying to get over the next life, he's just trying to survive until his parents get back. So it totally works.
Well, look, I mean, I was thinking, I don't think Ghost, even though Ghost was written by the same screenwriter, I think a more appropriate film for a double feature with Jacob's Ladder would be, of course, Carnival of Souls, which came out in 1962, the same year as the French film An Occurrence at Owl Bridge. And what I especially love about that film, which, by the way, the film wasn't lost, but at the same time, it was kind of ignored and forgotten because it was on a double bill, and it didn't get real exposure and real attention until 1989, a year before Jacob's Ladder. And what I love about Carnival of Souls, which is about a woman who survives a car accident, the car goes into the water. She mysteriously comes out, but the other people are dead, apparently. And she's being pursued by this man with a ghoulish face. Like she's driving on the road and the guy literally appears like in the passenger side window while she's driving. And yeah, it's a creepy, legendary film. I absolutely adore it. It's one of my favorite horror films. And what I love about what the director said when he made it, and this was a guy who didn't make Hollywood films, he made industrial films. And this was his way of making a horror film to break into the commercial film market. And he was saying that the man, which, by the way, the director actually plays the man. He plays this ghoul that pursues this woman, is like, the man is almost testing her. Like, I mean, are you really, I mean, are you sure you want to try to continue living when it's really testing her? I mean, she is dead. I mean, we don't find that to the end. I hate to spoil it for first timers, but then again, I mean, I think most people know what Carnival of Souls is. But then again, like The Sixth Sense, where, the man is almost testing her to say, look, are you sure you want to try to continue living when in fact your life is essentially over, being stuck in a purgatory-like state almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also wanted to kind of bring that up too with, because the Tibetan Book of the Dead was one of the other major influences on this movie, in addition to, of course, the biblical story of Jacob's Ladder. But I think you were pointing out last night about how many times Jacob wakes up from something. Was it 6?
Like 7, 8 times.
Okay, so
7, 8 times, yeah.
I didn't do a good rewatch on it, so apparently, but there are like 6 different bardos, different stages that you go through when you're during that time when you're trying to cross over, and escape samsara. So I was wondering, it's like, is that 6 in Jacob's Ladder and 6 bardos? That would be cool. But we also have the presence of those peaceful and the wrathful deities too.
Mhm.
I think there are 100. There are like 58 wrathful ones and 42 peaceful ones. But basically, I think it seems like the goal either way is just to get you to escape somehow. But because I'm looking at it through the lens of the movie itself. Obviously Louis would be one of those peaceful deities. Jake's chiropractor.
Played by
Aiello.
Yep, Danny Aiello.
Yeah. Also, Adrian Lyne had I think he had an actual chiropractor on set to show Danny Aiello how to, so it would be more authentic when he's doing those adjustments to Jake, which is great. And, he still gets chiropractors coming up they used to anyway. They would come up and thank him for that.
That scene did look, it definitely was the most satisfying, like those creaks and cracks. I'm like, oh yeah.
I've had my neck adjusted once, and it's actually very terrifying, but it did feel better after the fact. Just, I wouldn't do it again. That's all I'm saying. I'm an acupuncture gal, not a chiropractor.
Which they do to Jacob with that whole with the syringe going into his forehead. Yeah, which really remind me of David Lynch or David Cronenberg. Sorry, internet. It definitely reminded me of specifically Videodrome, but also a little bit of Naked Lunch. I definitely I got those vibes.
Peter Weller.
Well, one of the things that I was also noticing, so he's got a back issue, right? Returning from Vietnam. And all I could think of is just like, man, nobody wants to talk about the fact he got a bayonet in the stomach. Like, this just never comes up through this whole movie. It's not, it's just a flesh wound, but oh my God, my back. I got to go to the chiropractor. So, but, and then we've got even some of the wrathful deities. So, like Jesse. Jesse could probably be like a peaceful and a wrathful deity.
Yes.
I don't know if they necessarily always work on a spectrum, but at the beginning of the movie, she's, she doesn't know the name of his kids, right? And she's also, she also takes all of those pictures that his son burns them, right?
Yeah.
But that's her way of getting him to let go of those material things, right? To let go of this life. Like, fuck it. Who cares what your kid's name is? Fuck these pictures.
And that's what Danny Aiello's character constantly says. Once you accept, the demons will stop coming at your back.
Right.
Yeah. And with the same thing with the Tibetan Book of the Dead, like when you're seeing these, especially like these wrathful entities or wrathful deities, those are just like manifestations that aren't really there, right? Those are things I believe like your own mind is producing. So if you can free yourself to the point where it's like, that those can't hurt you, then you reach, you can attain enlightenment that way as well. So just like, man, this movie's so good.
Danny Aiello, Elizabeth Pena, and Matt Craven, who plays the hippie chemist that makes the ladder. They basically all try to clue Jacob into, stop wrestling with the demons, stop trying to figure the things out. Just let it go, let things go, and you'll be able to ascend into heaven. And that finale is so powerful. I mean, when he actually goes to his old apartment, it's raining and everything. When he comes in, we see the stairs on the right side, and of course, he eventually does go up those stairs. I'm not going to give away how exactly, but yeah, it's just, it's so powerful. The imagery and everything.
Even the outside of the apartment building with the, because it's quite a bit nicer than the apartment that he shares with Jesse, because, and I'm assuming that's the one that he shared with his wife and children. And there's a doorman waiting for him, and, refer to him as Dr. Singer.
Yep.
Because for some reason, this doctor of philosophy could not fucking figure it out that he's in purgatory. But fair. It's okay. It's different.
Fair.
You can't always see it from the outside. I got it. So yeah, and it's just kind of like, you can the much nicer facade of the apartment with the gates, and sort of like, oh, it's like the gates of heaven. I love it.
The gates of heaven.
Yeah, I love the dichotomy of the old apartment and then versus his newer place, which is very dirty, and this is a very filthy film. Like, there's a lot of dirt and grime in this film. Like, I mentioned this to Sam before we started. I'm like, man, they just don't make films like they just don't dress films like this. Like, everything looks very sterile and clean. Like, I'm going to be blaming Scream for that, but we won't go too far in that. But there's not, like, I would say Candyman is the only other film that kind of comes out after this that kind of does that urban decay.
Yeah. Yeah, very specific to the plot, and just 2 years after it, but we don't really have. Yeah, you're right. We don't really have that anymore. I mean, I was also just thinking like about the helicopter shots of the back to the time of Vietnam. If we did that now, it would just be like they just do some weird CGI or AI generated image, and that really depresses me. So
yeah. I mean, with these drug hallucinations with these simple practical effects. And if you notice, between the scenes with his first wife and then the later scenes with Elizabeth Pena, the color palette changes from scene to scene. It's
like
subtle.
a yellow to a blue almost, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
That's another Inception with like kind of the layers. We're kind of going layers from like Vietnam to like his daily life with Elizabeth Pena, and then his first wife, and then there's with the chiropractor. It constantly shifts between different planes of existence.
Yeah. Well, what layer are you on? Because you're all in black and white over there. Which photo are you on?
Close to Ascension.
every time you do the black and white one, you ascend.
Yep.
That's fine.
Just like Michael Myers.
Oh God.
But going back to the musical score, you guys are mentioning the Tibetan. I love this. Like throughout the film, we hear mostly a piano piece being played, but there are certain points. Mainly when he's kind of reflecting about his son, we are hearing this Middle Eastern type. I can't quite describe it, but this really just eerie, just like descending kind of melody just kind of creeps in. Especially when he's remembering things, and
it definitely has more of an Asian influence to it. And I was like, oh wow, nice. That was a nice touch. This whole movie is just full of nice touches. I mean, I want to know who doesn't like this movie, because it's fantastic. Oh, wait. Also, I forgot. We have to talk about the fact they remade this.
Oh, God. I didn't bother with it.
I didn't either.
I watched it last year, and I don't remember really anything about it, except it had two brothers, and also Adrian Lyne said on the commentary he would not recommend it. So.
And they also updated it to the Gulf War, ironically enough, which was going on when Jacob's Ladder was released.
Really? I got that confused. I had thought it was Afghanistan. I misremembered that.
Was it Afghanistan?
I don't know. I would have to go back and look, and I don't give a flying fuck.
Well, it's got a 4% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I think that's all you need to know.
A 4?
4%, a whopping 4%.
For a second, I thought you were referring to like the star system on IMDb, like 4 out of 10 stars, and you said Rotten Tomatoes. And then my brain went.
You know, what's funny is that another film that came out in 1990 with a few spiritual parallels was Flatliners, where they try to enter dreams and everything. That got a remake also, which also got like pitiful reviews. Like, why are you remaking these films?
I saw that remake.
Oh God, how bad was it?
It was pretty bad. Half the film was shot on a green screen. Like, there's so many parts where it tries to jump scare, and it's just like we are on green screen.
Just give me the old film grain. Give me the yeah.
I mean, I feel like the remake of Jacob's Ladder probably would have been passable as a movie if you hadn't called it Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, maybe.
That's all you had to do. So, but yeah.
And I think the reason why this film didn't, like, it's really hard to describe this film without really ruining it right off the bat. Mm-hmm. This is definitely a film you want to go into cold.
Yes.
And plus the posters, and then that horrible mid-2000s Blu-ray where it's got the Tim Robbins face, and you got all the ghostly figures all around him. It's like, what a cheesy.
Oh yeah. I noticed on Blu-ray.com real quick, that the Lionsgate, they put out a Blu-ray in 2015, which basically had this on the cover here. Even though I much prefer the original poster, from the director of Fatal Attraction. The most frightening thing about Jacob Singer's nightmare is that he's not dreaming. I much prefer that image right there. But that Lionsgate Blu-ray, it only has the director's commentary and the deleted scenes and the making of featurette. But this Via Vision Blu-ray, it has 3 outstanding video essays. One of them called Hidden in Plain Sight, Spirituality and Jacob's Ladder by Alexandra Heller Nicholas. Something's Wrong with My Head, the Vietnam War Trauma featurette. And also there's a featurette on the locations, and also Prepare the Way, which is a brand new interview with screenwriter Bruce Joel Rubin, which was done last year. And they also have the old featurette from 1990 and also other archival interviews. But one final thing I wanted to point out is that this is the tweet that I put out last year on Jacob's Ladder, where I basically asked, do you remember it? What do you honestly think of it? Saw it sometime in the early 90s, pretty much forgot about it. And one person that responded, and I got 315 likes and 135 comments. One of them that responded was the lady that played Jacob Singer's first wife. Her name is Patricia Kalember.
Yeah.
Right there. And she says, one of the best screenplays I had the privilege to read. And she's done other things. She was actually in M. Night Shyamalan's Signs with the aliens. And she was also in Fletch Lives and The Company Men, Limitless. She's done other films, and she's also on Law and Order Special Victims Unit. So, but yeah, that was pretty cool for her to respond to that tweet. Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Very cool.
Before we close up shop for the night, is there anything else you guys want to share about why you love this movie? Because I know we're all going to recommend it.
Oh yeah. I don't know if it's hyperbole, but even though Bruce Joel Rubin, after Ghost, he had gotten phone calls from Carol Cole, it's like, how do you think we should sell this? I mean, we need your advice, blah, blah, blah. And of course, this was before he got the Oscar, but he did tell the studio, try not to market it as a horror film. And I can understand why. The thing is that is it hyperbole for me to call it one of the best horror films of the 90s?
No.
I don't think so.
I don't think you can market it as anything else but a horror film.
Exactly, yeah. And I would put it up there with Silence of the Lambs and Candyman as one of the best horror films of the entire decade. And
Yeah.
considering how influential it is.
Mm-hmm.
And even the inspirations. I mean, read the short story by Ambrose Bierce. Check out Carnival of Souls. You know, the inspirations and the influences later. It's kind of it's almost in a way it's kind of a quasi landmark film that unfortunately few people saw it in 1990. But I think that, I mean, now's the time, especially after that remake, burned, failed and burned, and nobody will ever remember it or talk about that again. Yeah, this is a film that is ripe for a revisit, while at the same time, I think for a new generation to check out. I definitely think that it, and like I said, it's also a very sad but important footnote on what our soldiers went through in Vietnam.
Absolutely. Griff?
Yes, this if you're going into this film, don't go in it for necessarily shock value or even really tension. This is not a tension. It's horror, but it's that kind of, it's more, go into it thinking like more like a David Cronenberg film. Go into it sort of like a lighter version of a David Lynch. Like this film and Lost Highway would be I think an excellent pairing. I would highly recommend to check this film out, to see it any way you can, and just go in just expecting a dark but very quiet film. It's not boisterous. It's going to make you think, but I would highly recommend it. And just to go in, I mean, we try not to give away everything. There are some things we left out purposely. So, but just go into this film just expecting a trip. It's a great film, and I couldn't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the reasons that I really enjoy this film so much is because it's that very human experience that we all have to deal with, of coming to terms with our own deaths, which when you think about it, that's literally the only job that we have as human beings outside of survival. Is like, that's it. You try and live, and then you also have to figure out how to be okay with dying. That's like your main goal of being alive. So
you can't avoid death. You can't dodge it. You can't wrestle with it. You can't fight it.
You have to go through it.
You have to go through it.
Can't go up, below, to the side. Got to go through it, just like any difficult experience. And this is, as of this recording, you can watch Jacob's Ladder for free on Pluto TV. So please, guys, just take a couple of hours out of your day and check it out there. Stone, where can we find you online?
Oh, well, I'm on Twitter. For I don't refer to it as X, but I am on Twitter, and I'm also on YouTube. I'll be doing a commentary next week on North by Northwest Wednesday night. For those of you who want to join me for that, Alfred Hitchcock's classic movie with Cary Grant and Eva Marie Saint, and also on Region Free. And we'll see you all for our next episode on July 13th.
Yep, and all of the Jeebies content is pretty much just going to be hosted on the Visited by Voices network at youtube.com/visitedbyvoices1. Maybe having some channels pop up on Rumble or Odyssey in the future, but we'll see. And Griff, do you want to be found anywhere online, or are you just content with just like swooping in? And just,
I'm just content. I'm just content being here. This is my occasional visiting post.
Okay, cool. Well, your socials are a need-to-know basis, so only the cool people know where to find you. But yeah, we'll put socials, links to socials in the description below, as always. But until next time, come on over here and suck my big black rooster.
Get some tweezers.